r/askreddit. Driver's license testers. What's the worst thing a kid has done without batting an eye while taking the driving test? My dad was friends with a guy who worked for the registry giving the road test. His best story was of a kid who took his test while it was raining. He started driving without the windshield wipers on. The guy figured he was nervous, so tried to give him a break, saying, "It's raining pretty hard." The kid was white-knuckled on the steering wheel and just said, "Yeah." Again, trying to give the kid a break, he said, "Don't you think you should do something about that?" The kid said, "Yeah." Apparently he didn't know where the wiper controls were, so he rolled down the driver's side window and stuck his head out. At that point he stopped the test and failed him. The old Ace Ventura. I remember on my test day I got into my instructor's car on a nice sunny day and I went to indicate as I started off from the curb. Cue me turning the windshield wipers on, then the indicator off, then the wipers off. It was a European car and the wipers and indicators are swapped from my usual car, and because I only drove it once a week I always got tripped up the first time in the week when I had to indicate. Luckily I didn't actually move from my spot and was able to restart. That poor kid. When I parallel parked I hit the pole behind me, and the tester said it's fine. This should be an automatic fail, but I think that's a bit too harsh. Then I hit the pole in front of me head on. Did not pass. So nice you had to do it twice. Rule number 2, double tap. I'm not gonna be harsh. So I can do it again? Probably for the best. Wasn't a kid, my 80-year-old great aunt. The tester kept telling her to speed up. After a few times she said she can't see the speedometer, so she doesn't know fast she is going. He made her pull over and she did not receive a renewal, thank God. This is actually a very serious problem, at least in America. Your aunt seems to be the odd man out, as plenty of senior citizens have licenses, and absolutely should not. But no one wants to take their parents' car away and be responsible for the transportation, and no politician will get elected on the platform of taking old people's licenses away. But it needs to happen. Was taking my driver's test as a teen. Got to the point of doing the vision test. Was next to an old woman who was doing the same. She missed a bunch and the tester's response was, "Close enough." I was thinking, what? I was at the DMV and saw a poster that said, "When you text and drive you have the reaction time of a 65-year-old. To which my thought was, well, why the fuck do we give license to 65-year-olds then? Uber would be perfect for the elderly, but they're notoriously bad with cell phones. Took a test with a girl who drove on the wrong side of the road and took a left turn into oncoming traffic all in the same drive. It was through my school and she was banned from taking it through the school because of that. How does that happen? Like, how do you get your mandatory hours in with a practice permit yet drive on the wrong side of the road? My dad did testing for a few years and he once had a girl stop on railroad tracks. There was a train coming, slowly, but still it takes them a long time to stop, and it blasted the horn right into the car, passenger side, with the window open. This just made her freeze up even more. He had to reach his foot over to her side to hit the accelerator. Holy crap. Why in the ever-living world would she stop on tracks? My driving instructor had his own set of pedals on the passenger side. God, that must have been terrifying for them both. The kids make minor mistakes, and yes, some do make scary mistakes. However, it's the adults that scare me most. Especially the seniors who are up for a exam. Probably the worst test I've ever been on was this man in his 90s. I instructed him to turn onto a street when it is safe to do so, and he turned, narrowly missing a pedestrian. Not only that, but he was driving on the wrong side of the road. He came head to head with another car who pulled over to let him go. He was laughing about it, because he was under the impression that it was a one-way road. When I got back to the office with him, I cut the test short and got him back in the quickest and safest way possible. He was astounded when I told him it was not a one-way street. Me, did you see any one-way signs? Him, no, but I assumed you were going to take me on one. Edited for clarity. Sorry. Edit. As someone who is minorly disabled due to an elderly man hitting me on my motorcycle, I thank you for retesting the elderly and encourage more of it. Many thanks to the lives you save. Do you mean it was not a one-way street? My grandfather used to be a tester. He had one girl forget which way to turn the steering wheel, and they ended up in a ditch. Please tell me it was that they turned the wrong way when they were going in reverse. That's not good. Last year I was making a left turn at a light, and a car swerved into my lane and hit me. Turns out it was someone taking their driver's test. I'm not exactly sure how driver's test car insurance works, but the instructor told me we had to wait for the police and take details of everything. I am guessing the driver did not pass. Car accident was an automatic fail on my test, even if it wasn't your fault. Happened to anyone I know, but it's still a checkbox you don't want. I was the kid, and full transparency, it was a learning drive, not the test. We had to do 6 scheduled drives with our instructor, and had a partner. One would drive for 30 minutes, then you would stop and switch so the other could drive back. The rule when you got in the car, just so it wasn't a constant game of should I turn, was that you always go straight until the instructor tells you to turn. So one Saturday, we had a very early drive scheduled. We met up at the school, and I was the first to drive. We got about 5 minutes in, turned onto a main road, and the instructor quickly fell asleep. My partner and I quietly, with a smirk, agreed that we would still follow the rules. We took the road for about an hour and 15 minutes, until it dead-ended and you had to turn. I pulled over in a parking lot, and we woke up the instructor to ask him which way to turn. It took a good 30 seconds for him to realize what had happened and where we were. He yelled at us both to get in the back seat, and we witnessed some very unsafe ways to drive as we headed back towards the school. And I didn't bat an eye. He yelled at us both to get in the back seat, and we witnessed some very unsafe ways to drive as we headed back towards the school. Oh god, after I passed my test, my instructor gave me a treat. He drove me back. He used to be an ambulance driver. Holy fuck, one of the scariest drives I've ever had. I distinctly remember him edging out to see if it was safe to pass this truck. The nose of the car was under the deck of the truck. Lol, kinda hope he got written up for sleeping while supervising kids. Okay, 3 stories. My ex drove a Geo Tracker, tiny car. She pulled right into the parallel parking area and fit in so unbelievably easy, the tester made her do it properly. A girl in my driver's ed failed her test when she went to DMV because she turned into oncoming traffic. Not only was there a grass median, there was some of those skinny red-white poles for about 10 feet followed by a guardrail. Each side of the median was 3 lanes. There really was no way to miss it, but she did. On a lighter note, I did the backing up 100 feet. When the tester told me when, I stopped, and before I put it into park he asked me a few verbal questions, then proceeded to give me directions to leave the area and back to the parking lot where the parallel parking test would be done. Never put the car in drive, pressed the gas, and car went flying in reverse for about 20 feet. He apologized and said, "My fault for distracting you. As far as I'm concerned, that never happened." He apologized and said, "My fault for distracting you. As far as I'm concerned, that never happened. Passengers are distracting all the time. I thought it was gonna be a shit test." My first car was a Geo Metro, so I get how tiny those cars really are. Parallel parking was pretty easy for me when I was driving it because it really fit anywhere. Opposite kind of story here. When I was taking driver's ed, I was in a car that had the brake on the passenger side for the instructor to use just in case. Going 35 down fairly busy street, my car all of a sudden comes to a complete stop. In horror, I look over at my instructor, who is sound asleep with his foot on the brake. I just sat there dumbfounded. After a couple people honked real quick, he shook himself awake, mumbled a quick accelerate, and sat up adjusting his glasses. So that was fun. Good thing he didn't also have a throttle control. I'm still confused about all the differences between countries. A lot of presumably American folk talk about people doing it in their own cars. Your school's car only had a brake on the teacher's side. Germany has the full set of pedals on the teacher's side as well. You take your test in the same car and your teacher is prohibited from using them. You fail automatically if they see any reason to interfere. It's super helpful for stuff like learning how to park because they can take over the pedals and let you just steer your way in to learn how it's done without getting confused over gas. Someone in my apprentice class apparently had the teacher actually help them, though in an unexpected way. They were accelerating and already bordering on going too fast, and the teacher held against the pedal with their foot from below to keep them from going faster. They eventually realized what was going on and adjusted. Actually passed thanks to their teacher. My best friend's son just failed because he went the wrong way down a busy 4-lane road. Luckily, they made it safely into a parking lot and the testing administrator drove them back. Good thing no one got hurt. While I was waiting for my turn to do my CDL test, I watched a guy in a semi back into a light pole, and instead of seeing what he gently backed into, gassed it and knocked it over. Needless to say, I didn't get to take my test for an hour or so while they cleaned it up. Did you pass after all that mess was over with? This reminded me of a moment I had during my final test. The tester had an arm injury and was wearing a brace on his right arm. I took a left turn way too hard and caused him to accidentally hit his arm against the door. I was just like, oh fuck, I'm so sorry. Surprisingly, he passed me that day. Maybe he didn't want me to come back, LMAO. To be fair, that maneuver likely wouldn't have been bad enough to fail under normal circumstances. It seemed worse only because of his injury. It would have been unfair to judge you harsher because of it. I had a similar situation. Went up to the DMV for the test, 16 years old me, super nervous. And my tester had broken both wrists. Yes, both, in full casts. So we're chillin' going through the motions of the test, and off to the side every once in a while I can see her struggling to write things on a clipboard. Because as you can assume, all she has the ability to write with, and grasp things with, is the very end of her fingers. I pass the test, thank you Jebus, and we get back and she has to type up all my info, how I did, scores and such, with again, the end of her fingers. She looked like a hurt chicken pecking at the keys, as I'm sat there trying not to stare as this lady struggles to type and write things. Weirdest day at the DMV I've ever had. I went forward instead of in reverse when the tester was standing in front of me on the curb. I failed. Vroom, no, I think you are going to pass me. My best friend was coming to a 4-way stop sign in our small rural town. The tester said to go straight. So she did. Without stopping at the sign. Just drove right through without batting an eye. He basically told her, well, you failed, if you want to just drive back. That's rough, but at least it wasn't in downtown big city USA. As someone who worked in a DMV for many years issuing driver's licenses, even though I wasn't a license examiner, I think I'm the closest thing to your target respondent so far. The craziest thing I ever witnessed with my own eyes was a dude who somehow managed to lose control at 15 mph, jumped the curb, and smashed into the guardrail. Needless to say, he was not issued a license. The best story I ever heard from a co-worker happened immediately after she came inside swearing a blue streak because, during a part of the test where the examiner stands on the curb in order to observe maneuvers, her customer drove up over the curb and straight into her knee. Oh no, that's less than optimal. When I went to take mine, the tester waited till I was at an intersection and then yelled turn left. She scared me so I didn't fail, lol. When I went back to try again, she was just ripping into this girl and her mom in the parking lot. I was like, at least I'll get a different tester cause she's clearly busy, lol. During my test, there was a stop sign before entering the course. The instructor just told me to drive forward and looked at me. Needless to say, I stop at the sign, look both ways before entering. I feel like it was a trick to see who would not stop. I wonder how many people fail because they just drove into the course without stopping. I didn't have a license before I went into the army, but got licensed for several military vehicles while I was in. I get to the DMV after I got back stateside and the lady behind the counter points to my tester and tells me, good luck, in the most apologetic way possible. My tester was a complete ass. Before we even started, I asked what the speed limit was in the lot. Standard speed limit, he said. Okay, it's not in the book I got, so what's that? He gets huffy and tells me 15. Fine. The in-lot test went okay, but he was being really condescending the whole time. Went on the road and I took a right turn a tad too wide, yet still in my lane, and he berated me the whole rest of the way for it. Finally I had enough, pulled over, turned off the engine, and quietly said, Sir, I do apologize for that, but please keep in mind that the last vehicle I drove had treads, a 600 horsepower turbo diesel, and a big fucking cannon on it. I'm used to making turns a little wide so as to avoid bending track pins on the curb. Rest of the test went quietly except for basic instructions. Go back inside, and same lady behind the counter told me I was the first perfect score come from that tester, and he fails more people than he passes. I told her that he might have a better pass rate if he wasn't being an absolute prick to the people testing. It made me incredibly anxious. WTF, that is so mean. Answered his phone. Hey, I've seen that in a movie before, Alexander and the Horrible No Good Very Bad Day. Yellow? Lol, yo, I'm taking my driving test, this nerd doesn't even know how high I am. Longfeo. In my local area, a guy in his mid-20s failed the test for some reason. At this point in time, the results of the test were shared in the car. After being told he failed, he proceeded to get out of the car and grab an axe out of the trunk. I don't know any more details beyond that, but apparently it is why the results are shared inside the licensing building rather than in the car. Typically, yes. My tester told me as I was returning the car, I'm not supposed to give you results, but you barely passed and I want you to promise you'll practice a little more before going out on your own. Requirement to pass is 83 points. I passed with, drumroll please, 83 points. Not a tester, but I watched my, at the time, know-it-all son do the California roll through 3 consecutive stop signs as he was exiting the courthouse parking lot at the beginning of the test. The tester stopped the test and failed him on the spot, before he even got out of the parking lot. My son's excuse, I thought the test hadn't started yet. That's hilarious. I thought rules only applied during the test, not before or after. I'm not a tester, but I asked my tester during my full license test what was the worst thing someone had done. Apparently there was an older gentleman who drove through 3 stop signs before the tester told him to pull over. The gentleman explained that he didn't want the license but his family was pressuring him, so ran the signs on purpose to fail, made sure no cars were coming first. Malicious compliance. You're gonna make me do it? Watch me fail, safely. Come on grandpa, yeah, I gotta get your license renewed. No, I don't think I will. My driver's ed teacher said that one kid reclined his seat all the way back, put one foot on the gas and the other on the brake, and grabbed the top of the wheel with one hand and said let's go. Future Fast and Furious driver right there. Several in one day actually. I wasn't the tester, but I was waiting in line to G my test with about 30 other people. The car they were trying to use didn't have valid registration or inspection. Automatic fail. The car had no brake lights. Automatic fail. The insurance was expired in the car. Put it in reverse instead of drive. Nearly backed into the car behind them, but didn't. Automatic fail. Ran over the parallel parking cone completely. Automatic fail. Hit the curb turning left out of the lot somehow. Automatic fail. These were 6 different people who went before me. It was beyond frustrating. I waited over an hour for 6 out of the 10 people in front me to not even make it out of the parking lot. Just think how much longer you would have waited if they had. Not a tester, but I heard about a girl in driver's ed who was driving on the interstate with a teacher and 3 other students. The teacher commented that they missed the exit, but they would just get off on the next one. I'm not sure what the girl's thought process was, but this girl pulled into the grass and tried to go against the traffic to go back to their missed exit. The teacher had to use her brake on the passenger side while the 3 other students screamed bloody murder. One of my kids has his driver's test this coming Wednesday, so I've been taking him out driving a bit. And his sister was learning a few years ago. I told them both about what to do if you miss your turn. You don't stop, you don't swerve, there will be a way to come back. You look for the first easy and legal stop, and you pull off, and figure it out. Or, you take the next exit, or turn at the next street, even if it's a long ways. That was actually my biggest fear for them. That they'd do something sudden like this. While taking our CDL test, I was sitting in the sleeper area, and the guy actually taking the test ground gears when shifting. He immediately let go of the steering wheel. causing the proctor to have to grab the steering wheel and drive for the 5 or so seconds it took for him to recompose himself. One instructor was riding with someone who was fighting the gears so bad that he decided to use both hands to jam the stick into gear. Instructor popped the brakes, and the guy sitting in the top bunk ended up flying forward and hit the dash. The dash cam recorded it. In high school, my friend who was 18 at the time went to take his driving test. He drove himself there and failed the first time by doing a rolling stop at a stop sign. So he drove himself home. He tried a second time, did another rolling stop, failed again, and drove home. He got it the third time, though. When I tested, I told the instructor, I'd be honest with him. I cannot parallel park. But I am okay with that, because I will never parallel park. I'm happy to park 2 blocks away and walk. I then proceeded to attempt to parallel park. He agreed with me that I cannot parallel park. And then he said he was going to take my word on never attempting to parallel park. I lied. I've parallel parked twice in 20 years. Both times I had 30+ feet to squeeze my 15-foot long car into. One of my classmates in HS failed his driver's test 6 times. During one test, he hit a pedestrian. Phew boy, the fines must have been big to even try 6 times, not even counting hitting a pedestrian. Not to be a dick but I can one up this. Girl I went to high school with passed on her 13th try. I've been in a car with her and she drives like a fucking maniac. It was horrifying. Her main issue is that she'd never take responsibility for anything that happened. She'd nearly cause an accident and blame it on the other drivers. She only passed because by some stroke of luck and by lying. Illegal, the person who tested her on her 13th try was her gran, who automatically passed her. The same year she passed she crashed her car, and was punished for it. Except that's a lie because her parents bought her a brand new car the day after. I have no idea how she isn't dead yet. My old driving instructor told me about a kid that pulled into the drive-thru at McDonald's, ordered some food, then realized he left his wallet in his other car, was using the instructor's car. He wanted the instructor to pay for his food and said he'd offer half of his fries in return. The wallet also contained his license, so the instructor failed him on the spot and told him to get out the car. Not a test administrator but my ex-girlfriend failed her exam during parallel parking. She backed in perfectly then sped through the front cones. When I went to take mine the DMV was across the highway from the truck stop. I made a right turn onto the highway to go get on the interstate. Right after I turned onto the highway a semi turned left onto the highway, but he went across 4 lanes into my lane. My tester got silent. I had seen what he was doing and had slowed down and pulled over to the shoulder and then into a driveway until the semi passed us. When it was all clear I signaled and pulled back onto the highway then onto the interstate behind the semi. My tester told me to turn around at the next exit. I had passed. I'm taking my test this coming Tuesday, very nervous but this is making me feel better lol. Could always be worse I suppose. When I was sitting my test, I asked the tester how many tests he did in a normal day. His answer was 10. Not all that surprising, until he followed it up with 10, and 8 will fail before making it out of the car park. I asked him to elaborate, and apparently the vast majority of test sitters will fail for administrative reasons, like arriving late to the test, not bringing their existing learner's licenses, or having a vehicle that wasn't road legal. The latter was more common than it sounds. When all lights turn signals warn etc are tested in the car park before the test itself begins. Fail any of the above and you've wasted your $75 and never even got into gear. First time I took the driving test having never parallel parked before because I live in the suburbs I tried it and was like 3 feet from the curb. Second time I back into the space perfectly. Instructor says okay just pull forward a foot and you're good excited that I did it I never put it in drive and reversed over the cones. Third time it was pouring rain. I drove the exact speed limit. Afterwards he told me I was driving too fast in the rain but passed me anyway. I'm not going to say without batting an eye, but I used to run a driving school where my absolute worst and best student were the same people. He was deeply dedicated to the material, he was honest to a fault, and had studied everything so hard that he aced every on-paper exam. and then he'd get behind the wheel and basically have a panic attack. He could do it if he didn't have the worst case of nerves I've ever seen in my life. Poor SpongeBob was still trying to get his license last I heard. Not an instructor, but in high school, the instructor had me drive around doing his chores. I had to drive to Blockbuster so he could drop off his videos, to Dunkin' Donuts drive-thru, and to check out a house he was eyeing to buy. He clearly was teaching you how to drive correctly. I failed my first test by taking the wrong turn at a stoplight. Not an illegal one, and when I got us back to the MDV the tester said I drove beautifully and I would have passed with flying colors, including pulling over properly to allow an ambulance to pass, had I not taken a wrong turn off the course. Came back the next day and nailed it. My father used to tell stories of when his dad worked at the Massachusetts registry. One story, and I'll change names because internet, he told was there was this kid taking a test who was awful, but the kid was really stuck up. Somehow he had gotten my grandfather's name, so after the kid tries to act all slick and pull strings and goes, "I know Chuck Lafitte," my grandfather giving the test says, "Oh really? You know Chuck Lafitte?" Kid's like, "Yep, no you don't. Because I'm Chuck Lafitte." Kid did not get a license that day. Not a tester, but there was a license center next to the sporting goods store I worked at. A lot of people would come there and practice before their test out front in the straight-on parking spots. A young lady, who only had her permit, managed to mix up the gas and brake and drove right through the front of the license center. I was told later that she was even more upset when they wouldn't let her reschedule her test for the following day since they cancelled her test she was pulling in to take when she wrecked the whole front of the building. It wasn't long after that they installed a bunch of bollards in front to protect the building. I was amazed at how marked up they had gotten in the first few months. I witnessed some girl from a different country, she barely spoke our language, fail the parking part of the exam. Basically, you had 6 things you could do and 4 are required. We had to stop at a stop sign almost perfectly, easy because you can't get to speed, then parallel parking, 3-point turn and parking in a normal parking space like you would find in every parking lot. The only requirement was that you don't touch any of the stuff used to corner the different parts and you have 3 tries. When you touch something you instantly lose. So this girl literally took apart the exam place. She even got a second try even though the law forbid it. Her father was livid that the examiner wouldn't let her pass and tried to fight him. In the end, he paid for the damages and drove his daughter home. Edit. Typo. I guess I sort of fit the criteria. Prior military and after being certified for a long time in the Coast Guard as a truck and trailer driver for transporting small boats to boat launch ramps, I would take new guys out to practice driving with the trailer, working the hitch, basic maintenance, hand signals for spotters, making sure they don't jackknife the damn thing in reverse, and backing the boat trailer up into a garage boat ramp. Young kid just out of boot camp was with me for the day while we drove down to a ramp to offload boat and crew to work a few ranges, water lights, for the day. It was the kid's final sign off and he was to take the empty trailer and boat back to base alone after I joined the crew on the water. He'd driven with me as passenger successfully many times by this point and had all his sign-offs done and was endorsed by command to be rewarded his driver letter. Cut to several hours later and our boat is mooring up at the base pier and no new guy and truck in sight. That's weird. So I call the kid and try and find out where he was. Long story short, on the way home he stopped off at an ice rink to fug around and have fun but parked illegally in a handicapped spot. The government vehicle got towed but instead of calling us, he got an Uber home, turned off his phone, and hid in his barracks room. Had to get command to negotiate with the city to get the truck out of impound and the bean counters over at command. The federal auditors over with government vehicle procurement were not happy. He did not get his certification. Slightly off topic, but my husband had to take the test twice, as a teen, because he failed it the first time. Some nitwit ran a red light and went bailing through the intersection so he braked to avoid hitting them getting hit. He was failed because he had right of way so he should have just kept going. And, just let the other car hit them. He was pretty pissed off at being failed for avoiding an accident. Literally me. On my test I was doing great until I was faced with an unfortunate yellow light. The one where stopping would mean you slam on the brakes but going means that you're in the middle of the intersection when it's red. I cringed so hard and went through. In my mind I ran a red and was going to automatically fail. So for the remaining 2 minutes of the test I did not give a fuck. I ignored a yield sign and didn't signal into the parking lot, all very defiantly. At the end he passed me, because he was less dramatic than me about the cursed yellow light, but he was like, IDK what you were doing at the end there, though I was like, haha. Yeah.